G'day, how you going? God bless you. Before I launch into the topic of this video, which is why the church will not be raptured this week, I'd just like to read to you from Proverbs chapter 18 verses 13 and 17, which says this: "He that answers a matter before he hears it, it is a folly and a shame unto him." And verse 17, "He that is first in his own cause seems just, but his neighbour comes and searches him." So, on the 23rd of September this week, the Revelation 12 verses 1 and 2, and I believe verses 3 and 4, heavenly signs will occur. And some believe, because of verse 5, which says this: "And she brought forth a child, a man-child." Sorry, I'll start again. "And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne." Some believe that this verse is referring to the rapture, which in a sense it is. Because of the word caught up, which is the Greek word harpazo, which is mentioned in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 17, where it also says caught up and is using the Greek word harpazo. Some believe that because of that, this is the rapture. Now, what I'm going to explain to you is that Revelation chapter 12 verses 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 is a sign, and the meaning of the word sign is an indication or a token. So it is an indication and a token, a representation of what is going to happen. It is a token of the rapture. It is not the actual rapture. So we're going to look at the definition of the Greek word Sémeion, used in verses 1 and verses 3. And we're going to look at the original meaning of the word sign or token used in the Bible, which occurs in Genesis chapter 9. So let's just click on that verse number 1, and this is Revelation 12 verse 1 in different translations. And if we click on the Greek tab, we'll have the Greek translation, and we can see here a sign. So in the King James, it uses the word wonder, and that word means a sign. And the Greek word, the transliteration of that is Sémeion, and the Strong's Concordance reference is 4592, which we'll click on, and that'll open in another tab, which I'll now click on. So 4592 is Strong's Concordance reference in the Greek, and it's Sémeion, and the meaning of that is a sign. So the short definition means a sign, a miracle, indication, and the long definition, if you like, means a sign, miracle, indication, a mark, token. So, if something is a token of something, it's not the actual thing. Indication, it means that it's not the actual thing. It's a reference to the real event. So we'll go to Genesis chapter 9, and the first time the word token is used in the King James Version is in Genesis chapter 9. And generally speaking, the first time something is mentioned in the Bible will give an explanation of what that is, or a definition. So it's important to look at the first example of a word that occurs in the Bible. That gives us an idea of what the original meaning is. So the context here is just after the global flood, and God is telling Noah, and you can read it for yourself. Token is mentioned 3 times here. God is telling Noah that he's going to set up a rainbow in the clouds as a token of his covenant. If we read here, verse 13, I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of the covenant between me and the earth. So it is not the actual covenant, it is a token or a sign of the covenant. So if we click on verse 12, and I'll open that in a new tab, and we've got all the translations here, and we've got the Hebrew tab up here, so we'll click on that to get the Hebrew, the original Hebrew. So it says here a token, and that Hebrew word is oath. So we'll click on the Strong's Concordance reference in Hebrew, which is 226, and that's going to open in a new tab, and you can see here that oath means a sign. And if we look at some of the examples given here, I've got I've got it opened up here, 1 Samuel chapter 10, this one here. If we go to that, verse 7, and let it be when these signs are come unto thee, that thou do as occasion serve thee, for God is with thee. So I'll just read that again. And let it be when these signs are come unto thee, that thou do as occasion serve thee, for God is with thee. So Samuel is talking to Saul, and the previous verse says, and the Spirit of the Lord will come upon thee, and thou shalt prophesy with them, and shalt be turned into another man. So when this happens, that's meant to be a token or a sign that God is with thee, as we read at the end of verse 7. So it's a representation, it's an indication that God is with thee. So I've given 2 examples, and there's other examples in this here. There's 79 occurrences of the Hebrew word oath, 226. So the meaning of the word is a representation, right? So if we go back to Revelation chapter 12, and I'll just now the sign of Jonah. I think it says there Matthew chapter 12 verse 39. I'll just click on that. So there's 77 occurrences of the Greek word Sémeion, so 4592 Strong's Concordance. So if we go to Matthew 12:39, I'll just click on the King James. Verse 39. But he answered and said unto them, an evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall be no sign given to it but the sign of the prophet Jonah. So if you go to the book of Jonah, and we'll read here, as we read here in verse 40, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, or the fish's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So what happened to Jonah was an indication or a token of what was going to happen to Jesus. Jesus then died, and he spent 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. He was put into a tomb, and so what happened to Jonah was a token or a sign or an indication of what was going to happen to Jesus. So I've given you two examples in the Old Testament and one example in the New Testament of what a sign is. It is not the actual event. It is an indication of what's going to happen. So if we go to Revelation chapter 12, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. So that sign we know is definitely going to happen on the 23rd. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that that is going to happen. But it is a sign. It is a sign of what's going to happen in the future. According to the dual chronology of the book of Revelation, chapters 12 and chapter 6 are matching events. They are the beginning of the tribulation. From Yom Teruah 2017, which is the day before the 23rd, so Yom Teruah, when it has fully come, Acts chapter 2 verse 1 in reference to Pentecost says, when that day had fully come. And then Peter starts talking and he's saying it's the third hour, which is the Hebrew hour for 9 o'clock in the morning. So we know that Yom Teruah, when it is fully come, that'll be the 22nd of September. On the evening of the 21st, that is when the sun sets and the crescent moon will be seen. That is when Yom Teruah begins. And that is when the 1335-day countdown begins to the rapture. And then on Pentecost 2021, that is when the rapture occurs. Interestingly enough, Pentecost also has a countdown. There's a 50-day countdown to Pentecost. And that is a second witness, if you like, that there is a countdown involved, that we have a starting point and an end point. So back to the main topic. Revelation chapter 12 verses 1 and 2, that sign, and Revelation chapter 3 and 4, Revelation chapter 12 verses 3 and 4, those two signs are an indication of what's going to happen, a representation, a token, not what is actually going to happen. Yes, that sign is definitely going to occur. The astro birth, if you like. We have lots of different components to Revelation chapter 12 verses 1 and 2 going on. We have the gestational period of Jupiter within the womb of the constellation Virgo. We have what is known as the conception comet that occurred. That the comet that is known as C/2017 E1 that occurred 3 days prior to the 20th of November 2016. So the comet hit the cervix of the constellation Virgo on the 17th of November. And I've got a Facebook post that details all the things that have to do with Revelation chapter 12 verses 1 and 2. We've got this red dwarf called Ross 128, which is right near the woman's head, and there was a mysterious signal given out earlier this year that could be construed as the woman crying out, and that may again happen on the 23rd when she gives birth. We have Hanukkah happening on the 26th of November in 2016, which I believe is the day of implantation. And like I say, I've got a Facebook post detailing all that information. And so on the 17th of November, the constellation is inseminated, and then 3 days later, that's when conception occurs. So I've got details on a Facebook post about that. But all this is a indication. It is a sign. So when Jupiter is birthed, that is not going to be the day of the rapture. Okay? I understand that verse 5 says, and her child was caught up under God. But that is an indication of what's going to happen 1,335 days after Yom Teruah 2017. Daniel chapter 12 verse 12 says, blessed is he who waits to the end of the 1,335 days. Titus chapter 2 verse 13 says that the appearing of Christ is the blessed hope. Now, there are some who are saying that Revelation chapter 4 is also an indication of when the rapture occurs. There's one particular man who's been saying that for some time, that Revelation chapter 4 verse 1, which I'll go to now, verse 1, and after this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet talking with me, which said, come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter. So, if Revelation chapter 12 is the rapture, then chapter 4, verse 1 of Revelation does not make sense in that context, because because of the words, I will show thee things which must be hereafter. So there's a certain gentleman who was saying for some time, has been saying for a number of years, that Revelation chapter 4 verse 1 was the rapture. And now that the Revelation 12 sign is about to happen this week, he has in the last year been saying that Revelation 12 verse 5 is also the rapture. And I'll bring up a graphic in post-production that he refers to about this. Now just bear with me as I give you some more context here. Revelation chapter 1 verse 1 says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel and unto his servant John. So, must shortly come to pass. Then if we go down to this verse here, verse 19, write the things which thou hast seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter. So, we're told in the beginning chapter of Revelation, we are told that there are things which are, and there are things which shall be hereafter. So the text has to tell us when the difference occurs between those two events. So the things which are, they are chapters 2 and 3, which are the letters to the 7 churches. And the things which shall be hereafter, that is signified by the next time we are told that it is hereafter. So if we go back to chapter 4, verse 1, right? So John is, he looked, a door was opened in heaven, and a voice was heard as a trumpet talking to him, which said, come up hither, and I'll show thee things which must be hereafter. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. So the trumpet occurs. Here's the trumpet. He's caught up to heaven, and he is going to be shown things that will happen hereafter. So Revelation chapter 12, that is an event that happens hereafter. So Revelation chapter 4 verse 1 and Revelation chapter 12 verse 5 are not connected, simply because this verse in chapter 1, the end of it, clearly says, I will show you the things that must happen hereafter. So Revelation 12, because it happens after John is caught up, it is not connected to Revelation chapter 4. So Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5, it is a throne room scene, and we see angels, we see the 24 elders, we see the beast, not the beast in Revelation chapter 13, but the beast, we see here in verse 7, the first beast was like a lion, the second was like a calf, the third was like a man, and the fourth was like an eagle. We don't see any reference to the saints like we do in Revelation chapter 7, where it talks about people from different nations, from different tongues. So what we see in Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5, we see no reference to the saints. We see a multitude of angels, but we do not see in any instance a multitude of saints or people that represent the nations. There is no reference to the nations, people from the nations. Now, there is a reference, I think, in chapter 5 to the prayers of the saints. And when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials full of odours, which are the prayers of the saints. That's the only reference to saints in these two chapters, chapter 4 and chapter 5. But it is referring to the prayers of the saints. Right? It is referring to the prayers of the saints. It is not referring to saints being present in that throne room scene in chapter 4 and chapter 5. Okay, I wanted to keep this short. I've now gone for about 20 minutes. So I think I've made my point. Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 is talking about a sign. The Greek word is Sémeion, and that means an indication, a token, a representation. It does not mean the actual event. It is a token of the event. So when we get to verse 5, where it talks about the man-child, which is the body of Christ, which is the church, where it says caught up, yes, it is the Harpazo. Yes, it is the church being caught up, but not at that time, because that is a token and a sign and a representation of what's going to happen 1,335 days after Yom Teruah 2017. All right. Thank you for paying attention and listening to what I believe is going to happen, which is that the church is not going to be raptured this week. I believe the church is going to be raptured on Pentecost 2021, which according to TorahCalendar.com is the 18th of May. And Exodus chapter 34 verse 22, I believe, talks about the Feast of Weeks as being the wheat harvest. And Matthew chapter 13 talks about the wheat harvest there. And I've seen many comments of people saying that that the tares are burnt before the wheat is harvested. But if you look at the text, it says to be burnt. Right? The tares are gathered first, and they are to be burned. What farmer would bother burning the tares? What farmer would bother burning tares whilst he leaves his precious wheat in the field? The tares are bundled and left, stored for God's wrath. The wheat is harvested, and then the tares go into God's wrath, the second half of Daniel's 70th week. Revelation chapter 14, we see 2 harvests taking place. The first harvest is the harvest of the righteous, right? And the second harvest is the harvest of the wicked, who go into the winepress of God's wrath. So we've got the tares, which are the unrighteous, and we've got the grapes, which are the wicked. So there's two different harvests taking place, because the harvest of the tares, which are the unrighteous, they get resurrected at the end of the millennial reign, and they, the Bible says that books are opened and they get judged. And some may, as a result, scrape it into heaven. But the wicked, obviously, they're not going to have a hope. That's why there's those two harvests that we see in Matthew chapter 13, talking about the tares, which are the unrighteous, and in Revelation chapter 14, the very last few verses, which talks about the harvest of the wicked. All right, so Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, and 3 and 4 are a sign. And if everything else is true about Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, then I think that we will see meteorites falling to the earth on the 23rd of September. And, because stars can't physically fall to earth. It says in verse 4, "And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth." The only way that is possible is if it's meteors and meteorites. So meteors burn up in the atmosphere and don't make it to Earth. Meteorites, they make it to Earth. So we're either going to see both or one or the other, whether they, I'm only surmising. It does say cast them to the earth. So back in 2013 in Russia, there was a meteor. So something like that. And if they're going to actually make it to the earth, then one would think that they might actually be meteorites. So I believe that Jerusalem is the key place to see this take place. So it is most likely that we'll see some sort of celestial event take place, possibly seen from Jerusalem, because the sign, the sun sets on the 23rd at about 6:30, and the moon comes under the feet of the constellation, the last star in the constellation Virgo's feet. The moon comes under the feet of the Virgin, the feet of the woman, at 5:27 p.m. So that's when the alignment is complete. That is when Jupiter is birthed. So that is when I believe it says, sorry, I forgot this point. Verse 4 says that he, the stars of heaven, his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. And then the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered to devour her child, and as soon as it was born. So the stars fall before the child is born, which means before the moon moves under the feet of the of the constellation Virgo. So as it happens on that day, Prince Harry will be beginning the Invictus Games, and Prince Harry has 138 names. I've got a spreadsheet that details this. He has 138 names that reference his name to the number 666, using 9 different forms of gematria: Hebrew, Greek, English. So I had previously proposed that he would be at the United Nations in the belief that the Dome of the Rock was going to be destroyed. Now, what happened was the blood moon tetrad theory that I was proposing was fulfilled in another way. On day 666, which was the 24th of July 2017, after the last blood moon in 2015, and I've got a video detailing all this, that is when the Israeli cabinet, security cabinet, released a media statement saying that they're going to have smart security cameras installed on the Temple Mount and extra police in the next 6 months. So that's now 4.5 months, isn't it? So that was in July. So by the 23rd, that will be another 4 months left before their deadline. They said, within 6 months. So they're going to have extra police and smart cameras, and this would be in keeping with Mecca, which also have security cameras. So it's possible, given that my more dramatic postulation of events on the 24th of July didn't occur, but that was to do with buildings, the third temple and the Dome of the Rock. That's to do with buildings. The fulfillment was to do with the Temple Mount. The Jews, the Israelis, they effectively have control over the Temple Mount based on that 24th of July statement. And on the 3rd of July this year, their biometric database laws came into full effect. So they have total control now over the Temple Mount, and that started on the 24th of July 2017 when they released their media statement, and there's an official document on the Foreign Affairs page for that. So it's possible that Prince Harry won't be at the United Nations, as I had been postulating, and it's therefore possible, considering he will be in Canada on the 23rd of September with the Invictus Games, that will be a fulfillment of Revelation chapter 6 verses 1 and 2, where the first seal is opened. Not as dramatic as being at the United Nations, but based on what I had foreseen in regards to the Dome of the Rock's destruction and that not occurring, and based on me scaling up what I thought was going to happen, I therefore believe that what will take place with the Invictus Games in Canada on the 23rd will be him given a crown and a bow, and he's going to be on a white horse, and he's going to go forth conquering and to conquer. So that's all I've got to say about that. Just to recap, Revelation chapter 12 verses 1 and 2, that's a sign. And given that everything else has happened in regards to that, with Virgo and Leo, then it's possible we'll see some sort of meteorite event or meteor event in accordance with verse 4. But verse 5, where it says caught up to God, that is the Greek word harpazo. Yes, that's true, but in the context of these two signs, I believe that it is a token and it is a representation of what's going to happen on Pentecost 2021. All right. Thank you for listening. God bless you. May God bless you in what you're doing. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.